Hello, and welcome to Cyber Deck Users Weekly, a bi-weekly podcast about how to own technology. My name is Paul, and first off, I want to apologize for not being a bi-weekly podcast this week. I failed to track down anybody to interview, not because I lack a list of people I want to interview, but because I was too, this has always been a problem. This was one of the reasons why I wasn't a good journalist. Like, I just really don't like reaching out to people and asking for their time. And anyways, I got over that hump, and I have a couple of guests lined up, so I hope that works out. And so I should have some interview episodes soon. But for now, this is another solo pod, as I like to do on Saturday mornings. And today, I wanted to talk about books I like. What I did is I scrolled through my Audible library, which has like a ridiculous number of books. Most of them are about being trapped in an MMO world and grinding for stats. But I also like books about technology. The history of technology has been something that's becoming more interesting to me. I've never really been much of a history reader, but when it comes to, I don't think of that as a shining aspect of my character. I think there's obviously a lot to learn from history. I'm probably not the first person to say that. And so there's basically history of technology. There's think pieces on the present state of technology, and there's some sci-fi in here, and there's a little bit of stuff off the beaten path. Very few trapped in MMO books on this list specifically. I mostly went from, I was just scrolling, so either the book had been just recently read, newest to oldest, or I had clicked download on the book more recently, and that reordered it on the Audible listing. So this is not going to be perfectly in order of newest to oldest books as far as when I read them, but anyways, these are books that I like. This is obviously not a completely exhaustive list, but this represents definitely multiple years of reading. And again, I don't want anybody to get a false conception of me as just Mr. Intellectual reading books all the time. First off, all of these I read as audiobooks. And second off, I haven't finished all of these on this list. I have a bad habit of like leaving off a book after I'm like 75% done with it. But anyways, yeah, I don't need to self-deprecate too much. I do love these books. I like these books, and so I wanted to talk about them. Okay, so first on the list, I'm in the process of reading this one right now. And really enjoying it. It's called Fire in the Valley by Michael Swaine and Paul Freiberger. They were like computer journalists. Like they wrote for some computer magazine in like the 80s, 90s or whatever. And this is a history of the PC revolution. So it's, you had the big mainframes, right? Then you had what were called mini computers, which were like a mainframe was like a whole room, and a mini computer was like a fridge. And I think the term microcomputer was being kind of tossed around, but it was really interesting. Basically, you had a lot of pent up demand among hobbyists. Like, you could, if you were a nerd, you could get access to a computer at like a university or at a business and you could get some time on that computer, and you could play around with it. But you couldn't own your own computer. That was why personal computer was a new invention, because computers were so expensive and they were so big that you couldn't really own one. And there's really this awesome stuff in here where like Steve Wozniak in high school is designing his own computer on paper. He's just thinking through, well, if I could make a computer, how would I make it? And he's like reading manuals on like the computers that existed at the time, like the mini computers and stuff, and inventing his own. And one thing that's really interesting, where I'm at in the book yet, IBM has not done a thing. And they were obviously dominating at that time big computers, mainframes. There was DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation, that was huge in like mini computers. I really hope I'm saying the right one, because there's also microcomputers, but I think it's mini computers. And it's so interesting how none of the big companies see any opportunity in personal computing. But you had these nerds, like I was saying, who are getting a little bit of the taste at a school or at a business, but they want their own thing. And so there's this wild demand that's pent up that is completely not being met by anybody. But it's also like totally speculative and unproven, because like nobody really knows how much demand there is. And obviously it's still a very niche thing. It turns out there was enough demand to kickstart this industry, but there wasn't actually a real demand for personal computers. There was a demand for a computer that you could have if you were a nerd enough to care about those sorts of things. But there wasn't like, the personal computer didn't exist as something that would solve things in your life and improve your life. That came after the hobbyists got a hold of these like bare bones kits that they built themselves and then started writing software for them. And then you started getting things like VisiCalc, like the first spreadsheet, what's it called when you have like Microsoft Word is not a text editor, whatever those programs are called. Wow, I can't believe I can't remember what that is called. But you know what I mean? Something to write in, and then obviously they just had to solve so many problems. One of the big ones was storage. Early on, they just didn't have any storage. And like one of the first personal computers, you turn it on and then you'd have to program it by flipping switches to like get it to, it was bonkers how little was going on there. Then they like used like cassette tapes, and then floppy drives were a huge leap in innovation. Anyways, I don't need to go. I've got a lot of books here, but one of my biggest takeaways so far is this idea of entrepreneurship, and it's just these guys who want something to exist in the world, and so they're like, well, I think I know enough how to build one of those. I'll build it and start selling it. Like, it's just really cool, and maybe it's unrealistic. Like maybe you can't start a company like that now. But it's been making me think of like, what's a company that you could start now? Like, what wild demand exists that's totally unproven? It has to be non-obvious, or if it was obvious, there probably somebody would be going after that market. But I don't know. I think one thing I've been thinking a lot about is starting a company that would be sort of about like helping people have home servers, right? Like a Synology for consumer applications of, you could run your own home server and it would run Pi-hole and it would, store all your movies on it. You'd have like Plex server. And so those own cloud, Next Cloud type of stuff, but maybe somehow better. But I feel like a computer that you could have in your house that did a lot of really good things for you. I think there's a lot of demand for it from nerdy tinkerers. And and I don't know. I just think there's something there. And this book has kind of pushed me into trying to think that through more seriously. Okay, so anyways, I'm going to try to be a little faster on these because I don't want to be recording all day. The Mandibles. So this is a book by Lionel Shriver, who the book it kept on coming up on Bitcoin podcasts, and I don't typically like modern fiction very much. Like that's not sci-fi, and even a lot of sci-fi. So I avoided it for a long time. And it's about this family going through this, like, basically the collapse of the dollar. So it's like a sort of dystopian novel set in the near future. And the big takeaway for me, obviously, Bitcoin fixes this. It's very, it's very bullish for Bitcoin. If you think anything that's happening in this novel is plausible, but something that I think a lot about, and this, I think I brought this up before, the Jonathan Blow talk about civilization. Like, it's easy to think that the way things are and the good things we have in life and the technology we have and the comforts that we enjoy and the quality of life we enjoy are sort of stepwise. Like, well, we already invented the light bulb, so we'll always have light bulbs, We can't regress to not having light bulbs anymore because we already invented the light bulb. And I don't take that for granted anymore. Not just because of this book, but this book I think really illustrates it really well, where you can build up a very high quality of life civilization, but if you kind of fail at the plumbing of that civilization, that how much could really disappear, and how rapidly maybe it could disappear. Who knows? But I don't know how to make a light bulb, for instance. And even if I knew how to make a light bulb, I would need a lot of infrastructure. There's a famous book that I haven't read, but a lot of people refer to a lot, like iPencil, like how much interaction and how many companies and how much labor and how much coordination is required to make a pencil, like the supply chain and everything like that. So I don't think of progress as always, the number of progress is always going up, you're pushing, in some sense, a boulder uphill. And if you stop pushing, if you stop progressing and you atrophy somehow, the boulder could go downhill. Obviously, this has happened in history, and I don't want it to happen to our civilization. So, it's a very good book. Very interesting. Okay, next book. The Soul of a New Machine by Tracy Kidder. This is a non-fiction book about some people making a computer, actually a mini computer, I'm pretty sure. And it's just amazing. It sounds like a boring topic. I'm actually always on the hunt for books like this that actually describe people in the process of innovation, or in the process of inventing, or in the process of programming or building. That's why, I really like Fire in the Valley, because it's a lot of that. This is this amazing book. I think it won prizes. Like, it's well regarded for good reason. Like, it's a fly on the wall of this company building a computer, and the company doesn't really know what computer to build next. They've got a very successful machine on the market. They should, just come out with like a slightly upgraded version of that. And what's really interesting about this book is it very much gets into the psychology of what motivates an engineer, and what motivates like good engineering and innovation. And it's so interesting how turned off all these engineers are about making a stepwise improvement to what exists, and how excited and passionate and like, I'll work 24 hours a day for, years, they are about making a new thing and making something that's challenging and difficult. Also there's a TV show, Halt and Catch Fire, which has like a kind of a similar vibe as this. I'm 100% confident that whoever made Halt and Catch Fire read The Soul of a New Machine. But yeah, and anyways, it's so good. It's an older book, but it just, if you want to understand how engineers think, and this is something that I've really struggled with, because I feel like I've, been in very different circles and had a much different mindset than engineers. So as I've been becoming an engineer myself by learning programming, and it's, maybe it's offensive for myself to call myself an engineer, because there's a lot to that mindset and a sort of an organized system of thinking of how to solve problems that I don't necessarily have. But just what motivates someone and how they communicate and how they care about their ideas. Anyways, yeah, very good book. Okay, next book, Cryptonomicon by Neal Stephenson. After I read this book, I entertained the thought that Neal Stephenson invented Bitcoin. It's really interesting because it's a book about cryptography, and he has a blurb on his website. I didn't know this actually until I was looking this up to get a link to it. The book takes place in World War II and in present day, so it bounces back and forth. I kind of had avoided it because I'm not a huge World War II person. I don't know, it's not what I find super interesting. And so it's in the World War II stuff is very much about how to keep things secret. It's about cryptography in World War II. Obviously, the Allies had cracked Germany's Enigma, and so it's a lot about old-timey cryptography, how that was done. And then the present-day thing is very much about modern-day cryptography and how that's done. But weirdly, the book is also about money. And cryptography and money are not, to me, or were not to me, obviously intertwined or super related. And obviously Bitcoin makes them 100% related. And anyways, it's very interesting. It's a very, very good book. It might be, I love Snow Crash, but this might be one of his best books. It really makes you think, and it really gives you a vibe of cryptography in a really interesting way. Okay, AI Superpowers by Dr. Kai-Fu Lee. This is an interesting book. It reads a little bit like pro-China propaganda. And so in me recommending this book, and I hope with all of these books, me recommending a book does not mean I agree with everything in this book, But it's very interesting because it shows this guy is basically, with the conceit that this book is about AI, that AI is the hot new thing, and so, I'm exploring AI. I feel like this book is not really as much about AI as it's about comparing and contrasting the Chinese entrepreneurial mindset with the U.S. entrepreneurial mindset. One of the things, there's something like 400 Groupon clones, or there were at some point in China. There's this a real survival of the fittest aspect, and a real cloning, a lot of the most successful, a lot of the most successful tech companies in the US are first movers, right? Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, they were Google. Google's actually not a first mover. You had Yahoo, and then Google replaced that. Where you have a really good idea and you build it and it really catches on, and then you create this competitive moat because you're so successful. Whereas in China, a lot of the early tech boom there was doing clones of a US first mover, We'll be the Chinese eBay, we'll be the Chinese Groupon, we'll be the Chinese Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. And without, I'm against intellectual property. I don't think it's actually a useful construct, because I just don't think you can. Anyways, I'm not going to get into that. But China has obviously had an interesting relationship with intellectual property, and that lack of strong intellectual property controls meant that there wasn't this competitive moat for a lot of these companies. They were making a clone. Tomorrow Amazon could try to open something in China and compete with your Amazon clone, or 400 other engineers could start a different Groupon clone, And so the way he describes how Chinese tech grew really shows how strong and smart and agile and capable a lot of these Chinese tech companies are, because they had to be. They could not just sit back and enjoy the fruits of being, the first to market with a good idea, because they were copying someone else's idea. So it's just really interesting. It's a very good book, and it really turns into sort of a very pro-China message and a Chinese state message, and a pro-communism message I feel like I was getting from it as well. I found it so insightful, because I felt like I had always been much more, I feel like I only knew about Chinese companies like third hand, and I felt like I at least got a secondhand look at it, and it was really helpful. Okay, next book, How the Internet Happened. So this is a pretty new book by Brian McCullough, who does the Tech Meme Ride Home podcast, which I love. It's very helpful for, like, what I would prep for a Vergecast. I would read every article on the Verge that I thought might be relevant to that week's podcast, and also typically listen to an episode of Tech Meme Ride Home to get kind of a broader view of how people in general are viewing the week in tech. And so anyways, how the internet happened is, these first movers, I invented a web browser. I invented a directory of links. I invented a place for people to sell things to each other. I invented a place for someone to buy all things that ever existed. And it is interesting. It is very much about this sort of first mover advantage. You end up kind of having this like secrecy. If you have a good idea, you kind of want to keep it secret until you launch. The kind of froth of the .com bubble kind of starts kind of early, interestingly. And that really distorts the market, and kind of it makes it a lot harder to figure out what's a good idea and what's just cashing in on .coms. But it's a beautiful compendium of the origin stories of companies that have absolutely, changed our world. So of Google, of Amazon, of Facebook's in there. Like how Microsoft was thinking about the internet. Netscape was obviously a huge deal, which we don't think of as much anymore, but that was a huge, huge part of the internet. how the internet happened. So thank you, Brian. Okay, so next book, Life After Google. So this is, of all the books that I have here, I most disagree with this book in the sense of, so this is by George Gilder, who, he has a very good premise in this book, is that the way Google thinks about security is a losing battle. Like the way that they're planning to secure their users is an eternal struggle. Whereas, with good cryptography, thanks to Neal Stephenson's Bitcoin or whoever invented it, with good cryptography, that's a joke, by the way. I don't actually think he invented Bitcoin, but it's just, go with me. When you secure, you can have sort of a mathematical certainty about your security in some sense, and so it becomes an argument towards decentralization, obviously a favorite topic of mine, and it's really good on those fronts, and it really explains. And I'm not doing the best job of explaining. That's why I maybe have to read it, but why this is a losing battle and what the alternative might be. But also in the book, he thinks of Craig Wright as Satoshi Nakamoto, and if you're not familiar with Bitcoin drama, Craig Wright is someone who fraudulently claims to be Satoshi Nakamoto and is always suing people. He sued, I forget who, Blockstream? I don't know. He sued some company that funds a lot of Bitcoin core development, asking them to change the Bitcoin blockchain because he claims ownership over some coins. And it turns out the coins he's claiming ownership of are like the coins which were stolen from Mt. Gox. Anyways, he's an obvious fraud, and he's kind of a horrible person. And it is so sad that George Gilder treats him as Satoshi Nakamoto, and he has like these dream sequences where he's talking to Satoshi, who is actually Craig Wright, and trying to imagine what Satoshi Nakamoto would say about the now times. But anyways, I still, I did get a lot out of this book, but it's, I'm sorry you were conned, George. Okay, next book, The Bitcoin Standard. I have already mentioned this probably almost every episode of this podcast so far. This is the absolute best book on Bitcoin because it's really not very much about Bitcoin. It's about what is money. And it's a tough sell, I think, for a lot of people, because before you really get into Bitcoin, a lot of people don't really care what money is. It seems to work. But it is so fascinating, the history of money and the definition of money that Saifedean Ammous, this book's author, lays out, that it's just so good. And so basically, spoilers, the argument goes, here's what I think money is. Here's its role historically. Here's what's wrong with it. Here's what, and right at the end, here's why Bitcoin answers my definition. You know what I mean? So it's a very logical argument, and don't go into it without being ready for some logic, in the sense of it's going to be pretty challenging to your worldview unless you can find a hole in his argument, because he's not just anyways, an amazing book. Saifedean is writing some more stuff that's coming out soon. I'm really stoked about. Anyways, just a wonderful book, and it's about what money is, and it's fascinating. Okay, this is a kind of a little off topic, but this is called Books I Like. I really like this book. It's called The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli. I don't know how to say that. It's read, the Audible version is read by Benedict Cumberbatch. And it's who you thought he had a good voice in the movies. His audiobook voice is superb, and it's almost illicit how enjoyable it is to listen to him talk about what time is. And I'm not going to do it justice. This is physics stuff, but it's kind of what even is time. Just like what is money, what is time? What if there isn't really a thing as time? What if there's no such thing as now? And the order of time, what if the order of time is not a fixed property? This isn't like a preamble to a sci-fi novel. It's just, he's going into what we actually know about time, and in some sense, how little we know about time, or how time is sort of an emergent property, but there's no intrinsic property of time in our universe. It's sort of a way we talk about things that we perceive to follow one after another. And there's just, it's just, when you really dive into it, what is time? I don't know. It's just really fun, really fun. I mean, maybe, I don't know. So this is for me a little bit on the level of like the lit RPG, MMO novels of like, I like physics stuff because it's just fun to think about. It's not as applicable to my life usually, but it's just, I just find this really fascinating. Okay, so next book, The Master Algorithm by Pedro Domingus. I disagree with this book in the sense of, well, so the book is about the algorithms we use to do AI, right? So AI is a very broad term, and what we actually do with computers is apply algorithms to data. We try to make computers simulate what we perceive to be as smart by using mathematical methods. And so my sister just texted me because she's overhearing this. Word processor is the thing where you type things in. All right. Thank you, Eddie Lord. All right. So these algorithms are, there's a lot of them. So, AI is not monolithic. And obviously we're in sort of the neural network era, machine learning, deep neural nets, all that kind of stuff. What I really appreciated about this book is that by exploring these algorithms and what they're good at and what they're bad at, you get a very good sense of what could have AI applied to it successfully and what might be a losing cause to try, And now he's looking for this master algorithm. So like some unification theory of all algorithms somehow. I think it might be a bit of a wishful thinking or a little reductive of what intelligence actually is. But he's looking for some unified theory that you could just apply to anything and have computer do smart things with data. But by exploring all the way the book is structured, he explores almost all of the main algorithms that are in use. And so by learning about each of these, you learn like, okay, a computer could learn this sort of pattern and make good inferences if it had this kind of data. But if it had this other kind of data, it would be clueless, that was, I think, was very helpful for me. It made the world make more sense of why AI was good at some things and bad at others. So definitely recommend it. Doubtful of the, and also I have on the order of time and on this one, I've got YouTube links to actual talks. Do I have other YouTube links on this? I don't know. Anyways, very good book. Just doubtful of this unification, which, that's maybe just being a naysayer, but I think there's still a ton that we don't know about intelligence, and I don't think it will be reducible to a single algorithm. Seasteading. This is a fun one. Maybe a little off the beaten path. This is by Joe Quirk. I think there's a co-author. I forget the name. This is what if we made our own countries? LOL. In Silicon Valley, I think it's in the first season. One of the guys gets like stuck on like Peter Thiel character type seasteading island, run by robots. So if you are an anarchist, if you want to live life without a state, how do you do that? Where do you go? You can't go to another state because that's a state. But what if you could make your own land on the ocean? That's what seasteading is. And it's so fun to think about. The book also is like weirdly it's like seaweed propaganda. Like after I read this book, I bought a subscription to like dried seaweed supplements, dried seaweed as like a nutritional supplement, because the guy was just raving about, because when you're on the ocean, you can get all your nutrients from the ocean. So he's just sort of exploring the plausibility and the legality and how it would work to have some sort of seastead, some land out in the ocean that's not governed by an existing state. I loved it. This is also how I diffuse political talks a lot, is I just go to seasteading, because it's a little fanciful, it's a little weird, and I can still talk about, anarchy without saying, like, I want to abolish this and this and this and this. I want to change America to be how I want to be. Like, no. I just want to live on a floating island and eat fish all the time, That's all I'm asking for. Would you stop me from making my own dumb island? So anyways, yeah, seasteading. Reamd, we're going to get another Neal Stephenson book. I put this off for a long time because it was so long, and it is long. It's a very long book, and it didn't need to be this long. There's a lot of stuff in there that's not really super germane to what I find so interesting about this book. But I also know whenever I finish a good Neal Stephenson novel, and he's got a couple clunkers, but for the most part, they're all amazing. And I want another Neal Stephenson novel of the exact same kind, Like when I finished Reamd, I wanted Reamd 2. And so I can't really begrudge how long it is, because, I wanted more of it at the end. But it's a guy who makes an MMO, and with like real virtual scarcity and a little bit of how that interacts with the real world. There's some really interesting ideas in here I really like the idea of, and I'm not sure it's plausible, and I think I've talked about this before, but think of Chinese gold farmers, right? I'm a rich, lazy American playing an MMO, and I'm too lazy to grind for my own gold. So I PayPal a Chinese gold farmer, and they transfer some gold to me, and some WoW gold. And now, I've got more money, and I can enjoy the game. It is a little game breaking, right? But it's also really interesting as a form of economic uplift, of an opportunity, like a global opportunity to spread wealth around and create value. And obviously, I haven't perfectly thought out exactly how that would work. In Reamd, you have a single MMO, a single shard MMO universe with real scarcity, and it's like they did all these geological simulations for like where the ore deposits would be and stuff like that. And you've got real Chinese gold farmers, and the game is designed to facilitate gold farming instead of banning it. And I think that concept is just very interesting. There's also other things of like they hire out work, like there's like a security checkpoint at an airport, but it's like the most boring work ever, and it's easy to miss to make a lot of false negatives because you get so bored and your eyes glaze over. And so by trying to convert a real world thing into, there's like a virtual representation of it, and then you gamify it in a sense, literally gamify something. And that's something I think a lot about with Factorio. Is there anything there where people's drive to optimize these factories in Factorio could somehow be translated into a real world optimization problem? Anyways, it's very, Neal Stephenson, I think when he engages with a sci-fi concept, he really digs into it and he really thinks it through. And that's what I really appreciate. And then it's a really long book, but whatever. Okay, Stories of Your Life and Others. So, Stories of Your Life is the short story that Arrival was based on. A very good movie, very good short story. Others are other short stories. So this is a collection by Ted Chiang of short stories. It's like very good sci-fi short stories, and I'm not huge into short stories because a lot of times I just wish I had a whole novel. If it's a good idea, I want a whole novel to explore it. But these are very good. And my favorite one, forget what it's called. Let me just look that up really quick. But it's about this guy becoming slowly super intelligent, and so it's called Understand. And it's always fun to talk about, the singularity and like getting hyper smart and what it would be like to be super intelligent and stuff like that. And I feel like this is just a really interesting exploration of that. I just absolutely love it. Sometimes with certain things you read, or especially for me when I listen to things, I just remember where I was, and I was on an airplane when I heard this, and I just kind of remember that sensation of the first time I've read this short story. Anyways, it's very, very good. Also, just some weird stuff in there. There's like a Tower of Babel and one of the other short stories. Yeah, it's a very good collection. Next book, Permutation City by Greg Egan. Now, Greg Egan, he actually has a book called Quarantine. I really like it. I just left it off this list. It's really one of my favorite sci-fi authors because he is unapologetically technical. Quarantine's like about quantum stuff, and man, maybe I should have put Quarantine on this list, but not, a lot of sci-fi authors, a lot of sci-fi books, and I guess these are the ones that aren't my favorite. You use a technological concept as this jumping off point to say what you were thinking. And I feel like he uses this technological jumping off point to, okay, let's think it through. Let's be hyper technical and really examine how this would work and all the implications and stuff. Permutation City, I didn't know this until I looked this up. This was 1994. I thought it was like a 2000s novel. It doesn't feel old at all. It's about like brain uploading into simulations and simulating universes. And it's really interesting. Like, one of the things I just found really fascinating was the sort of these attempts to find like a easily computable fundamental building blocks where you can end up with, humans that live and breathe and move around and all working physics, and everything appears to work just like it does in our version of reality. But the building blocks that they build these realities of are so simple that they're much more easy to compute. This book also talks about this idea when you have a brain upload, it really matters how rich you are. It matters to how fast that simulation could be. And so if you're really rich, you can have a simulation and you get thousands of years per second. If you're really poor, maybe every, 100 years you pop up for a second, And so in both cases, time feels subjectively the same to you. But like how much actual time you are existing for and interacting with the world is different. So very, very good. Everything by Greg Egan. There's been a couple that they're so technical, that I maybe should read them with my eyes, but that's, it's just very difficult for me. If you're judging me for this Audible thing, a lot of it is because my, whole day is always on the computer. And so I really don't like to use my eyes to read, because I feel like I need to rest them. Maybe that's a bad excuse. Anyways. But yeah, I feel like maybe some of them are so technical, so challenging to read, that, maybe I should read them visually, but very good sci-fi. All right, we got 4 more books. Trying to keep this under an hour. The Information by James Gleick. Oh yeah, this is the other one where I have the YouTube link to talk. This is kind of challenging, a very interesting book about information theory. And when you start to think about information in a conceptual way, I feel like it sheds a lot of light. I don't know if it's a paradox or it's just a challenge. I don't know so there's this concept of entropy, right? So like we're trending towards entropy, which is like the heat death of the universe. But you also kind of think of like entropy as chaos, but like perfect entropy, like the end of the universe is you just have every particle stops moving and is evenly spaced and there's no heat difference. You know what I mean? Everything is just an endless sea of sameness and nothing. Which this is why, I don't know why this is the hardest thing in the world for me to grasp onto. And maybe it's just because these words are used interchangeably so much that it's kind of broken. But like that in some sense is a very low information thing to represent. So if you could think of like static on a TV screen, for instance, like how the HBO splash, I don't know if it still is, but it was always like the HBO logo over some TV static. Well, when you watch that on a computer, looks really bad, because you typically have some sort of compression when you're streaming. So compression, you're taking something with high information, you're trying to represent the same thing, but using fewer bytes. So less information in a sense. And so something that is purely random, purely static, actually takes a ton of information to represent. And if that information can't be represented, because the compression algorithms work on patterns. Patterns are ways of compressing information. I don't know. I'm not doing a great job of this. This is why you got to read this book. But it's also interesting because we create information. When we and what do we do as people? We're like finding patterns in the world. We're generating information, which in some sense is, by finding a way to compress something, realizing something isn't random, but there's a pattern to it, that is new information in one sense of the word. And it's also reducing the amount of information that's required to represent something in a different sense of the word. And yeah, like this gets into entropy, and these are things I really want to understand better. And I find them weirdly applicable. I think of like entropy reduction as like a job description of a human in some sense. Like we're trying to order the world, we're trying to take on static noise and either find a pattern in it or generate a new pattern. I don't know. A very good book. I think very, very popular book too. Okay. The moral case for fossil fuels. Now this is going to be a little controversial, but what I love about this book is that it explains how vital and important energy is to our civilization. the way he's framing it, this is by Alex Epstein, is basically cheap, reliable energy leads to human flourishing. So his moral case, his moral metric for whether something's good or bad is, does it lead to human flourishing or not? And he is explaining the importance of energy, and why fossil fuels specifically are so important is because of their, they're plentiful, they're cheap, and especially in the case of gasoline, it's one of the most portable energy sources. If you think of an electric car, right, how many miles can you get on an electric car, and how difficult and expensive is it to create a battery that stores that many miles worth of energy, whereas a tank of gas that is in some sense much cheaper, although obviously in some sense not renewable, is can so cheaply portable, so cheaply gathered. I'm not doing an amazing job. I really think explaining and understanding how vital energy is for civilization. Like one of his examples is, this hospital in the middle of nowhere that has inconsistent power, and they're trying to, do an operation, but they got to wait for the power to be on, and maybe they don't have a generator. Like hospitals. And even the United States, will have generators in case the power goes on. Like a lot of our technological level of society, a lot of the ways we're able to be efficient, like the reason why not everybody has to work on a farm for everybody to be able to eat, why we can just have a small percentage of our population work on a farm, is because we can leverage energy sources. And the better we get at leveraging energy sources, the more efficient we are at that, and the cheaper and more reliable those energy sources are, the higher tier of civilization we can reach in some sense. And it's just very interesting how much our energy level is related to our civilizational level. So moral case for fossil fuels. Obviously, it's going to be pretty challenging for a lot of people. But I highly recommend it, and I think he does a really good job of explaining his case. And I think there's a new revised version. I don't know. I haven't checked that out yet. Where Wizards Stay Up Late. This is more on the just regular technology. This is a history book about the origin of the internet by Katie Hafner. This book is a little challenging for me because it really sells the narrative that the internet was basically commissioned by DARPA. Like the government said, hey, just a couple people in the government said it, but that was all it took, apparently. Hey, what if there was something like the internet? We already have all these networks. What if those networks were interconnected? And they commissioned this company in Boston to invent the internet, and they invented the internet. It's also really interesting. This gets a little bit back to that entrepreneurship thing, although this is different than entrepreneurship, but the way the internet standards, like TCP/IP's invention, were just, it's not slapdash. It was just, and maybe it's just like, now we have the need for a protocol for this internet communication. So Vint Cerf came up with the protocol, and it seemed like it's, sounds like it's just so interesting how small amount of work it seems, and obviously this guy was very smart and very well engaged with the problem he was trying to solve. But how minimal in some sense the invention was versus the amazing benefits, and we still speak TCP/IP to each other, all the time, every day. But yeah, just a very interesting book. Not like the most this is not soul of new machine level of psychological insight. It's just a really good look into how the internet actually happened, and I really, really appreciate it for that. And yeah, and I still, I don't know the best answer. I believe a world without, oppressive governments would still invent an internet, and maybe it would invent an internet sooner, But I also can't deny that our government, the U.S. government, was very involved in the invention of, or at least commissioning the internet we do have. Okay, last book. Might get in under an hour. I'm so proud of myself. This is my most cited book because it is one of the best visions of the future I've ever seen. It's called Rainbow's End by Vernor Vinge, and it's basically about augmented reality, and I feel like we're just slowly moving into that world. I mean, Snapchat just announced this thing with these like places where you could, like, you and a group of friends could have a shared AR experience in a place, That is Rainbow's End. That is what Rainbow's End is about. I also really like this idea. I think it is a more accurate version of, like, the metaverse in Neal Stephenson's Snow Crash, obviously really inspirational to a whole multiple generations of people at this point. But the idea of a single shared universe seems pretty implausible. And now we have Epic's Tim Sweeney talking about, not Tim Sweeney. Wow, why can't I? You know what? I'm gonna get this right. Epic Mega Games guy, CEO. Oh, it is Tim Sweeney. All right, I'm not done. So Tim Sweeney thinks of the metaverse as like being able to like hop between different games, basically, And this, in Rainbow's End, you choose which augmented realities you want to subscribe to, and you probably have one that is your primary. And so if you are in the Disney universe, you see everybody else who has chosen a Disney avatar as that avatar. You obviously have some contact lens situation where, this vision is built in. And if someone else is in a different universe that you don't want to be a part of, you just see them as normal. I just think it's very interesting. I really like the people-centric aspect of it. Obviously, you're going to have corporations involved, but there's so much user choice. And I really hope that is sort of where we go. Like, I hope that our shared augmented realities are not only by Snapchat, but that they are in some sense peer-to-peer, and that we can sort of choose how we want to represent ourselves, what weird filters we want over the world. Something I've always wanted is a filter that blanks out all the billboards. I think that would be really fun. And there's just, so much interesting stuff. There's also a lot about, sort of user interfaces and how, a very good augmented reality could help with learning and with better mastery over a computer and a more effective form of computing. So I just love this book, and I just, as an actual vision of a future we're kind of getting, it's one of the most insightful, I think. Okay, so yeah, that's the list. In case, I don't know if this is helpful, I'm going to do it anyways. If you don't want to listen, I'm going to recap the whole list real quick, just so in case you wanted to search something right now, you don't want to try to rewind for it. If you don't want to listen to that, thank you for listening. Sorry I missed an interview episode this week, but hopefully I'll make it up for you next week. Thanks, and have a good day. Okay. Fire in the Valley by Michael Swaine and Paul Freiberger. This is about the history of the PC revolution. The Mandibles by Lionel Shriver. This is about an economic collapse because the dollar dies in America. The Soul of a New Machine by Tracy Kidder. This is an engineer team in like the 70s or 80s building a new mini computer. Cryptonomicon by Neal Stephenson. This is half in World War II, half in modern, whatever, 90s or whatever. Cryptography and Money. A novel. AI Superpowers by Dr. Kai-Fu Lee. This is about Chinese entrepreneurship contrasted with U.S. entrepreneurship and some about, there is AI stuff in there. How the Internet Happened by Brian McCullough. These are origin stories of tech companies, especially in the 90s, leading up to the dot-com bubble and maybe a little bit past it. Life After Google by George Gilder. This is the guy who got fooled by Craig Wright, but it's also about about security, privacy, and how Google can't do it for you. The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous. This is about what is money. The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli. This is read by Benedict Cumberbatch, and it is about the fact that time isn't a real thing. The Master Algorithm by Pedro Domingus. This is about all the different algorithms that we use to do machine intelligence now, and is there a unifying theory? Seasteading by Joe Quirk. This is about me having my own country on an island that I made out of floating trash. Reamd by Neal Stephenson. This is a very long book about a guy who makes an MMO with virtual scarcity. Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. This is a collection of short stories that includes the stories of your life, which is what Arrival is based on, and also this guy who gets mentally uplifted. Permutation City by Greg Egan. This is all about simulating physics and simulating minds. The Information by James Gleick. This is about entropy and information theory, and what does that mean? And man, I should just reread that and take better notes. The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels by Alex Epstein. This is about climate denialism. Where Wizards Stay Up Late by Katie Hafner. This is about the history of how the internet was built. And Rainbow's End by Vernor Vinge, about augmented reality. So that's my list. Thank you for listening. Have a good day, Paul.